Good evening and welcome to the weekend. I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute. You're watching Devil's Advocate. So this legislative session did have some small successes, maybe even large ones when it comes to sentencing reform. It's a weird thing. You're going to like this. Hang on a second. So the long arm of the law up in Adams County, Don Quick, you're the prosecutor up there.
Yes, sir.
You've also worked on the Colorado, what is it? I want to say, I always get this wrong, the CCJJ.
Yeah, Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice.
All right, so in other words, this was a committee put together, I believe, by the governor. And the idea was to put together people to look at sentencing reform.
Among other criminal justice issues, yes, but sentencing reform was one of them.
And I know you've been wondering what lucky person gets to represent me in the State House. It's this beautiful woman, Claire Levy, and I've never voted for you in my life.
I'd be doing something wrong if I got your vote.
Let me make it very clear. You piss me off, and I will endorse you in the next election. There'll be no way you'll win in Boulder. So, now, as a legislator, tell me a little bit why this issue of sentencing, and I want to kind of go back to the beginning of how we got into this situation. Why is it a big deal this year? Why, out of all the things we got to worry about, we're talking about whether somebody should get 5 years or 6 years when they get caught stealing a candy bar. Why is that important?
That's a really easy question to answer. Because, I mean, you look at a couple of things. First of all, the budget problem that we're having, and what department is gobbling up a lot of money that we don't have any control over, that we could try to get some control over, and it's the Department of Corrections. So there's money.
K through 12 education, but we'll fight about that some other time.
Caseload driven, and if you just look at the line on the graph of where correction spending was per capita or as a percentage of the budget back in the early 80s versus where it is now, it went from less than 3% of the general fund to 9% of the general fund. And so the budget compels us to look at sentence reform. But the other thing is looking at these hard numbers of our recidivism rate in Colorado. How many offenders who go down to the Department of Corrections or spend time in the probation department or wherever it is that they go, how many of those offenders are we actually successful with?
What amazes me about
we're not doing well.
This issue is that left and right can meet on some of the same answers for completely different reasons. That as a fiscal conservative, I want to punish people as cheaply as possible, which, by the way, if we could bring back the chain gangs or electrocutions, that would be just fine. And on the left, a lot of people are concerned about how do we rehabilitate these people and get them off drugs and all the rest. You know, you actually care about people. I haven't understood that for a while. But still, it seems as though there is some this year especially, people from both sides coming together on this. Am I reading that wrong?
John, I agree, because as someone who is responsible for public safety in my community, the best public safety is to not have some crime committed in the first place. If you ask any, especially victim of violent crime, what I can do for you, and they tell me, well, I'd like to have not been a victim of violent crime. I wish my daughter hadn't been sexually assaulted. I wish I hadn't lost my brother to a homicide. And so being smarter about reducing the crime rate, being smarter about not having recidivism as high as it is, provides good public safety and a good economic decision at the same time.
Let me go back in time and see if I understand how this went. I remember in the 70s, I remember back when you couldn't go to New York City, you know, the pre-Giuliani days. And I remember Republicans beating their chest saying, you know, you look at Dukakis, you know, the revolving door ad of criminal justice. And that worked. And we started doing things like 3 strikes and you're outlaws, which sounded really good at the time. And I gotta be honest, it still sounds pretty good to me. You know, you've screwed up 3 times. I don't want you in society. And I don't want you in society because you can cause damage. If that guy who raped somebody's daughter was still in jail,
right? Well,
then that's worth the $30,000 a year we spend to keep him in jail. But talk to me, both of you, talk to me a little bit about, has the Get Tough policies worked over the years? You want to start with
Sure, and John, it's like having incarceration as your only strategy is like having a broken pipeline at your house and your only strategy to address it is to get bigger and bigger buckets. Okay, at some point that's going to fail, and we have
buckets being the jails,
right?
The prisons.
That's right. You've got to figure out how do you turn down the faucet on the front end to have less people come in. If you really want to stop that pipeline from still churning, you have to do that. And so when the violent crime rate has gone down, one of the causes of that has been the increased incarceration of violent and repeat offenders. But it can't be your only strategy.
To simplify that, that's because when you take bad guys off the street, they're not going to be committing crimes. So it's
Right.
easily worth 30 grand a year to lock them up if they're going to make $40,000 a year worth of damage.
But you got to look at another part of this, which is that something like 95% of the offenders who are in prison are going to be released. So you need to look at what are they going to be like? What do they look like when they get out? And are
They
they
usually
going
have
to?
tattoos.
They're really bulky.
Yeah, they're really bulky.
And they've got a lot of tattoos. But so what kind of, they're going to be rejoining society. How are they going to behave? Are they going to be re-victimizing people or not? So we know that we've got to have the most effective sentencing strategy we can have so that they're not re-offending. But going back to your comment about 3 strikes, great sounding comment or concept. The question is who gets the 3 strikes? And we've seen over-inclusive use of it in California where, you can shoplift 3 times amounts under $50. I'm exaggerating maybe, but not very much. And you're locked away for life at taxpayer expense.
Take that example. So did 3 strikes and you're out not really work as planned? I mean, talk to me as
You have to talk about, so we have in Colorado.
When it comes to, the guy steals a pack of cigarettes, and that was his 3rd strike, is it really worth the 30 grand a year that we're spending to put him away?
Yeah, no.
Well, John, it depends, and I want to tell you that it's not mandatory. One of the things that the DAs can do is waive the 3-strike rule and make them probation eligible, and that happens in every courthouse almost on a daily basis, where the DA is saying, I'm waiving the 2 prior felony rule. There's not mandatory prison. We'll make this guy eligible for probation. So the answer is it's not an automatic 3rd strike. There's a gateway function being done by the DA. Now, I know there's some objections to certain DAs use it one way and other DAs use it the other way, and I understand that, and that should be examined. But does it work for violent criminals on his 3rd violent crime to get him off the street for as long as possible as an habitual criminal? The answer is obviously yes. It's how the system is applied and looking at good data that tells you whether it works or not the law itself.
But one of the things that Don's point, or one of the points he makes, though, is the importance of discretion in the system and the ability to say this offender ought to be charged under the Habitual Criminal Act and this offender ought not to be. And I think in California, if I recall correctly, they passed a citizens initiative that makes it mandatory. And when you take away the discretion of the district attorney on charging or the judge on sentencing, that's when you start to get these results that in some cases are just absurd. So you need a safety valve, and that's one of the things that the CCJJ has been trying to focus on. Where do we need to have discretion in the system so we can look at the offender and the circumstances, and where do we need to maybe take some of that discretion away to get more consistency in the result?
Okay. So if I were to put this in real simple terms, it seems as though we've had this get tough idea, but the get tough idea means you actually have to build a lot of prisons. When you build a lot of prisons, you've got to build them, you've got to staff them, you've got to take care of the inmates, and these are people who are not paying taxes because they're in jail. And some of these folks are here for nonviolent drug offenses. According to the state, something like 20% of them are there for nonviolent drug offenses. You prosecutors say, they might not be there for a violent drug offense, is what we caught them on, but that's the Al Capone thing. We got them on something else, but really they're bad guys. If that's the case, I would like them to be labeled as bad guys. So I'm sensing that given the economy, given taxes, given the growing number of buckets, as you put it, this year in Colorado, you guys got together and actually agreed. And there was actually some real buy-off on this, not just from bad guys who wanted less sentences. When I say sentence reform, particularly a lot of conservatives here, you're being light on criminals. You want to save the money, so you're letting criminals out. That's the big thing. We're in a budget crisis, we're going to let the criminals out. Well, let's go over some of these bills that came out this year, but are you letting criminals out?